Hey, remote students, people who are online. I get that this week has been a little bit weird being in online while I have a class full of students. So I'm going to be working on this assignment with you so that you can watch this video while we're in class, so that you get a little bit more direct instruction and help on this. Okay, so you have this assignment that says, "Was Athens really a democracy?" So we're asking the question, did the people of Athens really have charge of the city? Were they the ones who were in charge? Did the common people, were they the ones in charge of the city? So we're going to read some documents and fill out the questions. So on this assignment, the one that says remote students, that you should have already have open because you have the video up, I want you to make sure that you have this Google Doc open that says Athens, a democracy, question mark, and it'll have these questions on it. Okay. So here's what I want from you. Just follow along and I'll do the questions and we'll fill in answers as we go. Okay. But make sure you're following along. So I'm going to start with this first document. Okay. So this first document, one of the big things we want to ask question wise is who wrote this? Okay. So who wrote it and why did they write it? That's an important question in history. So we have document A is written by a guy named Pericles. It says the following excerpt. An excerpt is just a small part of a big speech, okay? So the following is an excerpt from a speech known as the funeral oration, delivered by the Athenian general and politician Pericles in 431 BCE. So this is a guy who lived in the time of ancient Athens that we're studying, okay? Pericles was widely seen as the leader of Athens. He gave this speech during a funeral for Athenian soldiers that died in the first year of the brutal war against Sparta. All right, so I find out that Pericles is one of the leaders of Athens. He's giving a speech at a funeral for soldiers who died fighting for Athens against Sparta. So, what I'm going to do is, you guys on your Google Doc here, so you're going to want to pull it up, and it says, who was Pericles? So we said he was the leader of Athens, right? And why did he give this speech? He was giving it to honor. It was at a funeral, so usually you're honoring people. You try not to talk trash on people at funerals, you know. So he's honoring soldiers who died for Athens in the war. Okay, pause. Go put that in. Okay, pause this. Go put that in on your Google Doc. All right. So I'm going to guess that he has good things to say about Athens because you usually don't talk trash on your city during a war and when you're honoring people who died fighting for it. So let's see what he has to say. He says, our Constitution or our laws favor the many instead of the few. Okay, so he's saying that their laws take care of a lot of people, not just a few people. This is why it's called a democracy. Okay, so he's saying that they are a democracy. If we look to the laws, they give equal justice to all. Advancement in life is earned by one's reputation for good work. So he's saying you move up the totem pole, you move up in life, right, by working hard, by doing good work. Social class, like where you're born, poor or rich, social class is not allowed to interfere with someone's merit or ability. That's what merit means, is ability. And poverty does not block the way. If a man is able to serve the state, he is not stopped by his social class. So listen, he's saying our laws make it equal for everyone, and just because you're poor doesn't mean you can't move up. Everyone's treated equally. Everyone is treated based on their abilities, not on who they are, who they were born to. Okay, so I'm gonna go back to this, right? Go back to my Google Doc. What was Athenian democracy like? According to Pericles, he says everyone is treated equally, and I'm going to say no matter if you are poor or rich. Okay? Everyone's treated equally. He's saying it's a good thing. So according to this document, was Athens a democracy? He said yes. All right, so that's all you got to put. Pause, put these in, okay? Pericles, he lived during that time. He's the leader of Athens. He says, we are a democracy. We treat everyone equally. Okay? Now, let's remember He's probably not going to say bad things about the city that he's in charge of, right? He's not going to talk trash. You wouldn't hear the president usually talking trash on the United States. You're probably not going to hear Pericles, the leader of Athens, talking trash on Athens. So keep that in mind. We're going to go to document B. Remember, pause, go back if you needed to get those answers down. Okay, I'm going fast, but you can pause and go the speed you want. So I'm going to document B. So this is a chart, right? This is a chart. This data is from a book they collected to give what people lived in Athens during ancient times, how many people lived there, and who was allowed to vote. So you have citizen men, that's 12% of the population, they're allowed to vote. Citizen women, they're not allowed to vote. Children of citizens, kids, that's a big part of their population. No, they're not allowed to vote. Medics, it says down here, they were foreigners or Greeks from other city states that settled in Athens. So they're immigrants, people who come from other cities, aren't from Athens. All right, they are not allowed to vote. Slaves, who make up the majority of the population in Athens, they are not allowed to vote. So down here, we can see that the percentage of the total population able to vote is 12%. Okay, and we over here get to see who was allowed to vote and who wasn't. So that helps us with our questions. Okay. So here, what percentage of Athens' population was allowed to vote? It's 12%. Okay, that's about 1 out of every 8 people. Okay. Which groups were allowed to vote? Men were allowed to vote. Women, children, medics, and slaves were not allowed to vote. Now remember, medics means immigrants. Okay. Doesn't mean like a medical professional. It's not like a medic who shows up on an ambulance. Okay. Different. Metic with a T. So men are allowed to vote, nobody else. Okay. So according to this document, was Athens a democracy? You can kind of put the answer that you want here. I'm going to say no, because only 12% could vote. All right, so you can pause. You can put those answers in, okay? Now, if you want to say yes, it still thinks that they're a democracy because that's a lot of people who still get to vote, especially during those times, then you can put that there too. All right, but we're going to move on. So pause if you need to because I'm moving on to document C. I'm going fast. Remember, you can go slow. Okay, so we're going to move on to document C. All right. This one says Professor Hansen. Mogens Herman Hansen is a professor of philosophy and classics at the University of Copenhagen before retiring in 2010. He's considered a leading expert in the world on the subject of Athenian democracy. So the following is an excerpt, a small part of a big article he wrote in 1989. So remember, this guy's a professor. He has studied this for a long time. He didn't live during that. I mean, he's alive now. So let's think about real quick. Question 1 here. Who wrote this document? Professor Hansen. How is it a good source? He is an expert. Okay. I'm gonna backspace a little bit here so I can write. Why is it a bad source of information? So I don't know if it's a bad source of information, but he didn't live during the time. Okay. I'm going to backspace it to make it look pretty. You don't have to. Okay. But good, he's an expert. Bad, he didn't live during the time. Okay. You can pause it. You can type those answers in. All right. I'm going to go back and read what Professor Hansen has to say. Professor Hansen says there is one main objection regularly raised against Athenian democracy. So he's saying there's one thing that people usually say why Athens is not a democracy. Okay, why they're saying no, it shouldn't be considered a place where everyone was in power. It says They did not allow everyone to vote. Democracy in Athens was ruled by male citizens only. No women, foreigners, medics, and slaves were allowed to vote. Thus, by today's standards, it was not a democracy. However, Athens' democracy was at the same time more democratic than by today's standards. Today, we elect people to represent us and they vote on laws. In Athens, every male citizen voted on every law instead of having others vote in their place, as we do today. Therefore, the men in Athens had more of a say in their laws than our democracy does today. So he's saying that the people who were in charge, the people who were allowed to vote, had more power than we do today. We have to vote for people who then vote on laws. They voted directly on laws in Athens. They would get together and vote on every law. So that's different than us, right? We vote for people who then vote for laws, and we have to vote for people we like or don't agree with, okay? So not everyone was allowed to vote, but everyone got to vote on the laws and not just for people. So let's look at this here. According to Hansen, how was Athens more of a democracy than ours today? So I'm going to type in here, I'll make my font a little bit bigger so you can read it. How is Athens more of a democracy than ours today? The men who voted got to vote on every law. Okay? Put that in there. So, according to this document, was Athens a democracy? I go back in the first paragraph. He kind of said yes. Okay, he kind of says yes in the first one here, or excuse me, he kind of says no in the first one here. It says only men were allowed to vote, so it's not quite a democracy. But then he says also it was a democracy, even more so than us today. So the answer here is going to be yes and no. Okay. In some ways, they were not, but in some ways, they were. Okay. All right. We've got one more to go here. Okay. Document D. Stick with me. If you need to take a break, pause, take a break, come back. Right. I get it's a long video, but I'm trying to make sure we get caught up and help. I know doing the remote learning is hard. So I'm going to do document D. And this is by a guy named Professor Camp. Okay, so another professor, another expert. Professor John Camp does archaeology. That means he digs up sites in Athens. He's also a professor of classics at Randolph-Macon College. So this is an excerpt, a small part of an article he wrote in the New York Times in 2003. Here's what he says. Oh, so before we do that, we got to go back and do our first few questions. Who wrote this article? Who wrote this document? Professor Camp. How is it a good source? Same as the last one. How is it good? He is an expert. Bad? He wasn't alive in ancient Athens. Okay? So he wasn't exactly there, but he's read a lot about it. He knows a lot about it. I think we can probably trust this guy, okay? So now we're going to go back here. We're going to read what he has to say. This is a very interesting document. Once a year, the Athenians, so the people in Athens, would meet and vote on a simple question. Is anyone a threat to the democracy? If a majority voted yes, then they all left and came back together 2 months later. So they would say, is anyone a threat? If most people said yes, they go back, they leave, and they come back in 2 months. They brought with them a fragment of pottery. So that's really interesting, a little piece of pottery on which they'd written the name of the person they thought represented a threat. The man with the most votes lost. They were exiled for 10 years. So they had to leave. They weren't allowed to be in the city anymore, okay? And this was thought to keep any one person from becoming too powerful. In other words, so we're on the second paragraph. In other words, the Athenians not only voted people into office, but they had a regular procedure for voting one person per year out of office. So they not only voted for people they wanted to represent them, they also voted on we need to get rid of this person for a while. The exile did not involve any punishments, so they weren't thrown in jail, they weren't fined, they weren't beat up. It wasn't anything like that, except they were removed an individual from politics. So that person couldn't be involved in Athens politics, voting, debating, couldn't do anything for 10 years. The Athenians were better than we are at enforcing responsibility in their leaders. Almost every high ranking man of Athens from 500 to 400 BC took one of these 10-year exiles, courtesy of the Athenian people. So most of the big name guys in Athens had to go leave for 10 years because they didn't want them to be too powerful, didn't want them to have too much power. Okay. So let's look at this. What was exile in ancient Athens? Okay. Exile was when someone was forced to leave the city. And why did they have exiles? They didn't want any one person to have too much power. Okay. All right. They didn't want any one person to have too much power. So they would vote to kick him out. So, according to this document, was Athens a democracy? I'm going to say yes. Right. This guy says they're democracy. Okay. So these are the four documents that you need to have done, that you want to have done by today. It's all in here. You can go back, read it, pause, type in your answers on the Google Doc. But hopefully this helps. Let me know in email or in the chat if you have any questions. All right. Thanks, y'all.